Finally forced out. The former prince, now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, has officially left Royal Lodge and will live in a home on Sandringham Estate in Norfolk.
A Grade 2 listed Georgian masterpiece, Royal Lodge is a 30-room crown jewel with 7 bedrooms, a private chapel, sunken gardens, a swimming pool, an aviary, 6 lodge cottages, and even quarters for protection officers. Its gates have stood the test of more than 2 centuries of royal history, but nothing compares to the crisis now playing out behind them. A prince stripped of his titles, a king forced to exile his own brother, and a grand residence turned into the focal point of the most explosive royal showdown since World War I. Prince Andrew got what many dubbed the deal of the century when he moved there in 2003, a 75-year lease that lasted until 2078 for just £1 million up front and a so-called peppercorn fee that was practically symbolic, meaning he lived in a multi-million-pound house for almost nothing in terms of rent. In 2008, his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson joined him, and for almost 20 years, they maintained an unusual but seemingly unbreakable arrangement. A scandal-plagued prince who was no longer serving the crown was still enjoying royal luxury at nearly no cost, a revelation that sparked public outrage and set the stage for a reckoning that could permanently alter the monarchy. However, in 2024, when Britain was dealing with a brutal cost of living crisis and families were struggling to make ends meet, everything changed. The public backlash was swift, intense, and unrelenting. How could a disgraced prince continue to enjoy a virtually free royal mansion while regular families were struggling to pay their own mortgages? Andrew refused, believing his unbreakable lease protected him, despite King Charles's months-long behind-the-scenes pressure for his younger brother to downsize. He suggested Frogmore Cottage, or another more modest home appropriate for someone who was no longer representing the crown. Then, in 2024, Virginia Giuffre's memoir exploded like a bomb, bringing back all of the negative headlines associated with Jeffrey Epstein and putting the king under extreme strain as public indignation grew and the monarchy's standing was at stake. On October 30th, 2025, everything fell apart because something had to give. For the first time since 1917, a reigning monarch had deprived his own brother of royal status when Buckingham Palace issued a statement so remarkable that it sent shockwaves around the world. His Majesty had started the formal process of removing Prince Andrew's style, titles, and honours. The final blow quickly came when he was given formal notice to give up his Royal Lodge lease, ending the 75-year agreement that ran until 2078 and the peppercorn rent arrangement completely. From that point on, he would only be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, not Duke of York or His Royal Highness. Above all, the palace made it clear that it supported victims and survivors of abuse, making it clear that the royal family had taken a side and that it was not Andrew's. The legal date for his departure was October 2026, but according to reports, King Charles hoped he would depart much earlier, preferably by Easter 2025. He was allowed a year to leave. As concerns grew over whether Andrew would receive payment for the millions he spent remodeling Royal Lodge, the impact swiftly spread. Sarah Ferguson lost her title as Duchess of York, purportedly leaving her sad and dependent on her children, Beatrice and Eugenie. The Crown Estate conducted a thorough assessment, but when investigators and removal vans started showing up at the gates in late 2025, they discovered something nobody had expected: a hoarding crisis that would further engulf the scandal. Soon after, disturbing tidbits of information started to surface, presenting a very unnerving picture of life inside Royal Lodge, as several insiders used the same word, hoarder, independently. Documents, photos, and belongings amassed over decades were said to be piled floor to ceiling in room after room, transforming what should have been a straightforward relocation into something akin to an archaeological dig. Even if Andrew wanted to go right away, the amount of stuff would prevent him from doing so without meticulous sifting, according to one buddy, who acknowledged that the clutter had turned the move into a months-long, room-by-room excavation. The ramifications extended well beyond practical considerations. After withdrawing from royal responsibilities in 2019 and becoming more solitary, Andrew seemed to have turned inward, holding on to shards of a past existence he could no longer bear to part with. This was more than just clutter. It was a sign of a declining mental health condition and a denial-based coping strategy. King Charles had hoped for a smooth transition, but when storage units were hired, tough choices were made, and every room was methodically cleaned, sources warned the clear-out may take until at least Andrew's 66th birthday on February 19, 2026, if not later. The ultimate blow came when the Crown Estate's examination determined that, despite the £1 million initial payment and the millions spent on restorations, Andrew would probably not receive any compensation for giving up his lease early because of damage from deterioration, hoarding, and dilapidation. He was receiving nothing in exchange for losing his legacy, his titles, and Royal Lodge. When news finally broke of his next stop, royal observers were taken aback. Marsh Farm, a small working farm in Wolverton, 2 miles west of Sandringham House, had been abandoned for years. This startling decline highlighted how far the fall had come. The truth about Marsh Farm only made the shock worse. Those who had seen the property described it as dilapidated and in terrible condition. In order to put the disparity into perspective, Andrew was selling his 30-room Georgian mansion for what his friends referred to as a shoebox. He was giving up a private chapel, a swimming pool, an aviary, and well-kept grounds for a simple farmhouse that needed a lot of work just to be livable. He never desired Marsh Farm at all, according to sources. Instead, he preferred Wood Farm, Prince Philip's previous retirement residence, which was bigger, cozier, and nearer Sandringham House. However, there was a reason that request was turned down. It was thought inappropriate to put Andrew close to the royal family at important events like Christmas. The 2-mile drive to Marsh Farm was not an accident. Rather, it was a planned buffer meant to keep him safe. Richard Fitzwilliams, a royal analyst, stated rather frankly that keeping Andrew at Sandringham was really a means of managing him. Despite the winter rain, construction workers arrived in January 2026 and installed security upgrades. A 6-foot fence in place of the barbed wire, CCTV cameras, and surveillance systems. However, issues persisted because the property was too small for live-in staff and lacked enough garaging for Andrew's luxury cars. Consequently, King Charles ordered the ad hoc deployment of a cook, groundskeeper, and cleaner from Sandringham, which was a dramatic psychological change for a man who had never managed his own home and had been raised at Buckingham Palace with servants attending to all of his needs. The residence was far smaller and less opulent than Royal Lodge, according to one insider, while another pointed out that he hadn't lived in a place that modest since leaving his apartment in Buckingham Palace, where he used to have complete control over the building and grounds. As if things couldn't get any worse, January 2026 dealt another blow. Marsh Farm is located in a floodplain. Andrew's forced relocation turned into an environmental nightmare no one had predicted when a 2024 flood risk assessment for the nearby Wolverton Barns confirmed the area is covered by an Environment Agency flood warning system. The assessment cited real and recognized dangers, such as the possibility of the Wolverton pumping station failing due to a mechanical breakdown or power disruption, putting properties like Marsh Farm directly at risk of flooding. If flooding did occur, emergency action would rely on temporary pumping equipment, meaning Andrew's safety depended on a system that could malfunction at any time, supported only by rapid response personnel in the event of a disaster. The timing was even more remarkable. Just as these dangers were becoming apparent, Storm Chandra pounded Britain with strong winds and pouring rain, prompting King Charles to close the Sandringham Estate's children's play area because of the hazardous conditions. As the storm struck, royal observers noticed with concern that Andrew's flooding vulnerabilities would have gotten worse in real time, highlighting the very dangers that specialists had forewarned about. Questions immediately arose about whether environmental risks had been adequately evaluated before to Marsh Farm's selection, whether the king was aware that the property was exposed to floodplains, and if so, why he would put a family member in a house with such glaring hazards when there were other Sandringham homes available. Some pundits went one step further and proposed a more sinister reason. Choosing Marsh Farm, in spite of the dangers, might have been a calculated move to make Andrew's situation so miserable that he might ultimately decide to leave the UK entirely. However, environmental risks were only one aspect of the issue. After drones were seen over Sandringham in March 2025 during Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to King Charles, authorities decided to expand Sandringham's no-fly zone to cover the property and stop drone surveillance after security experts expressed grave concerns about Marsh Farm's exposure. Importantly, weeks before Andrew's titles were officially revoked, on September 22nd, the law extending the restricted airspace to Marsh Farm was signed. This made it abundantly evident that plans for his relocation had already been made before the public announcement. This was not a snap decision. The move was not just planned, it was organized. It was deliberate. With an explanation note citing public safety and security concerns, the official order stated that the Secretary of State had decided it was in the public interest to amend the restricted airspace. However, experts questioned whether Marsh Farm could ever be made even remotely as secure as Royal Lodge, with its well-established defences inside Windsor Great Park. Marsh Farm, which was situated on a remote rural property 2 miles from Sandringham House, presented significant obstacles to a prompt response in the event of a security incident. Additionally, sources disclosed that King Charles would be paying for Andrew's lodging and protection on a private rather than public basis. This irony was not lost on observers, as it might have been less expensive to leave him at Royal Lodge, where security measures were already in place. Early in the year, Buckingham Palace stated that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor would be moving, but just as the financial and logistical ramifications were becoming apparent, there was another surprise. One relationship had seemed indestructible for years. Andrew's friendship with his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, who had resided at Royal Lodge since 2008, openly defended him and stuck by him through isolation and scandal. However, it was announced in January 2026 that Sarah would not be joining him at Marsh Farm. According to sources, she had supported him for years, but now she was ready to spread her wings. Having lost her title as Duchess of York and facing an uncertain future of her own, she looked to her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, for support while she made plans of her own in Windsor. A nearly 3-decade post-divorce partnership based on friendship, co-parenting, and unflinching loyalty despite the Epstein fallout came to an end with the decision. Her withdrawal was a devastating blow to Andrew, who was left to face life at Marsh Farm utterly alone after losing his best friend and most outspoken defender. Furthermore, the timing of Sarah's departure begs the question: was she unwilling to tie her future to Andrew's because she knew something about Marsh Farm or his long-term fate? Andrew's life was completely shattered by this, and the losses were immense. He had benefited from a private pool, an aviary, a well-kept sunken garden, and the Royal Chapel of All Saints for private prayer at Royal Lodge. But these were all gone, so he had to travel to services somewhere else and run the chance of being seen by the public. Ad hoc help from Sandringham people on a schedule he did not control replaced the 6 lodge cottages for staff and guests, a gardener's cottage, integrated police accommodation, and live-in staff who attended to his requirements around the clock. Not only did he no longer have appropriate clothing for his fancy cars, but he also lost his dignity, individuality, and autonomy. Friends claimed that although he truly didn't want Marsh Farm, the formal eviction left him with no other option. According to royal specialists, King Charles's decision sent a strong message to the public and the royal family. Privilege and titles come with expectations for behavior, and failure results in immediate, serious, and long-lasting repercussions. Reports that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor had moved to Sandringham House were confirmed by commentators who progressively came to the conclusion that Marsh Farm was a purposeful tactic of isolation and control, placing Andrew in a secluded farmhouse 2 miles from the estate. When it was revealed that Andrew had asked for Wood Farm but had been turned down because it was too close to other royals, the intention became clear. He could stay on the estate, but only at a distance that would keep him from running into other royals, with 2 miles being the bare minimum that was considered appropriate. In contrast to Windsor, where Andrew had developed ties over 20 years, rural Norfolk provided no social network, requiring Andrew to start again at the age of 66 or 67. Additionally, he was geographically separated from his daughters, who were important sources of support and lived in and around London. Andrew's long-standing relationships in places like Dubai and the wider United Arab Emirates suddenly took on new significance, offering a potential escape where his scandal might not follow him so relentlessly. However, friends said that Andrew fully understood the strategy and might eventually decide to leave the United Kingdom altogether. Some suggested that he relocate to the Middle East, where he has long-standing business contacts. Royal experts openly discussed this possibility as a realistic endgame. According to reports that surfaced in mid-January 2026, Marsh Farm might not even be his permanent residence, but rather only temporary or interim housing, while alternative choices were discreetly investigated. The notion that Marsh Farm might be temporary, following months of unrest, expensive renovations, and increased security, raised serious concerns about King Charles's true intentions. According to sources, Andrew might be moved once more within the Sandringham estate, while additional work was being done, either on Marsh Farm or another undisclosed property. For a man who had previously experienced complete security, this signified that his housing dilemma was far from over, and that he would now be subject to more volatility, uncertainty, and upheaval. While some royal experts took the temporary designation as proof that no final decision had been made on Andrew's long-term destiny, others saw it as a tactic to save face, enabling him to accept the move without completely giving up hope that things would get better. The king's advisors maintained choices by characterizing the farmhouse as temporary in case Andrew's health deteriorated, security concerns increased, flooding dangers increased, or public sentiment changed. Marsh Farm is a real warning sign for a life currently characterized by instability and impermanence, not merely floodplains, poor infrastructure, or isolation. From a prince with a stable position and home, Andrew has devolved into a man without titles, reliant on his brother's kindness, and uncertain of his future in the UK. Marsh Farm, from 30 rooms to a shoebox, from peppercorn rent to dependence, from royal duty to exile, from Prince to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, is more than just a smaller home. It is a representation of weakened, brittle status that could change again at any time. What's really explosive about this moment is that Andrew's next move has the power to change the monarchy itself. Will he go into silent exile, rebel lawfully, give interviews, write a memoir, make shocking discoveries that rock the crown, or abandon Britain completely? A humiliated royal with nothing left to lose, alone and uncertain, might be the most dangerous person of all. King Charles has taken unprecedented action against his own brother, but it is unclear if this is a solution or just a postponement of an impending explosion.